So I'm happy to be here, and I'm thrilled to welcome Anita Gail Jones and Julia Flynn Siler. Just a little bit about them. Anita Gail Jones is not just an author, she's a weaver of dreams whose enchanting narratives captivate the imagination and touch the heart. Her acclaimed debut novel, The Peach Seed, has captured readers' hearts with its rich storytelling and unforgettable characters. What truly sets Anita apart is her ability to infuse her writing with a sense of authenticity and depth that resonates long after the final page has been turned. Whether she's exploring themes of family, identity, or the search for meaning, she does so with a rare blend of compassion, insight, and literary prowess. We are also delighted to thank Anita for participating in Students' Day. Julia Flynn Siler is a journalist and New York Times bestselling author of 3 books. She's also a veteran journalist and foreign correspondent, and she's been a guest commentator on PBS, BBC, CNBC, and CNN. Thank you, Julie, for being here.
Well, first of all, thank you to Ginny and David for hosting us. Another just fabulous festival of friends and Students' Day. You transfixed those students. It was a little miracle. Really, you should have seen them huddled around her afterwards, and one of them who wanted to be a writer coming up to you and sharing innermost thoughts about
his plot.
His plot.
His plot. It was great.
And you were very gracious. It had to do with aliens and stuff, but
yes, aliens and the lucky god, the unlucky god, and yeah, he was cool. I had to move him over. I said, "Come and talk in this here so I can get these folks moving with their books." And I thought he might go away, but he stood there and waited patiently. So it was a pleasure. It was really a nice crowd, and I understand they changed it. Instead of having the whole school come, the people that really want to be there come. So that's always nice.
Well, you're a great communicator, and you really captivated them. It was really something to see. Tell us how long it took you to write The Peach Seed.
The entire journey was 14 years, from conception to publication, and then to signing the contract. And there was another 2 years before it came out. So I'm often asked, how did you stay with it for so long? That's a lifetime for a 14-year-old. And it truly is about endurance and staying close to the work, watching the work grow, watching it get better as you work on it. And because if it wasn't doing that, where did you just jump off a bridge or something? Because it's definitely staying with the work and staying in the process and knowing when to get help so that you can take the next step, those kinds of things. But it was...
As a reader, I'm happy you stuck with it, Anita.
It's
a beautiful book.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, what was the initial inspiration for writing this story?
It began with a question from my dad. Mr. Silas Jones was born and raised in Albany, Georgia, in Putney, Georgia. There's a lot of him in Fletcher, the lead character, a lot of other men in my family. But I wanted to know how my dad, born in 1921, a part of the greatest generation, but because of the color of his skin, not able to realize the promises made to that generation. How did he manage to be a leader in spite of it? Because in being born in 1921, growing up in the 30s or 40s, 50s in South Georgia, he saw some stuff. And he was a part of some stuff, some bad stuff. So how did he manage to be a leader in his home, his church, his community, on his job, when in the eyes of the government, by way of actual laws and policies, he was less than human? And he had already, gone to glory, as we say. He'd already passed away by the time this formed in my mind in 2007 when I began the project. So I decided to turn to fiction for an answer. And at the same time, I was reading James Baldwin's book, No Name in the Street. and Baldwin answered the question. You can always count on him. He answers the question you don't even know you have yet. And the gist of what he said, anyone observing black men in the South in that era, the civil rights era, could only say they were heroic, and that they were heroes more in small ways than large ones, and more in private than public. Thank you, Baldwin. That was my dad, and that was the men who helped raise me. I had a lot of elder cousins because my dad was the last of 21 children. He and Fletcher have that in common, too. And so by the time he was born, the first set of his dad's kids had children, and he was the baby uncle. And so he had a lot of nieces and nephews that were more like brothers and sisters. So they were more like uncles and aunts to me. And so I just kind of took all those folks and put them together and created these characters that I dearly love. They're special folk. You know, people say writing is a lonely business, but they have not spent time with a head full of willful characters bent on having their way. Oh. That is not lonely.
No, not at all. Tell us about the first scene, the first time we meet Fletcher, the character partly modeled on your dad, and Olga, who is his older sister, who's losing her vision.
Right.
And you introduce us to a place that Southerners know well, but I'm not sure people in Northern California are familiar with the grocery store
Piggly
chain.
Wiggly.
Piggly Wiggly. Tell us
Who
about
knows
that.
about Piggly Wiggly? You know, I'm so surprised how many people know, and they weren't just in the South, apparently. I think I met someone from Ohio that said they're going away, unfortunately. The only ones that are left are privately owned. They're no longer a chain. But you gotta love it, Piggly Wiggly.
Great
My
name.
dad used to call it Hoggly Woggly. He was funny like that. So the book opens with the scene of Fletcher and his sister Olga going to the Piggly Wiggly for their weekly grocery run. And he walks past a moment that changes his life. It's
He smells the moment.
He smells the moment first.
Explain that.
I love that part too. He smells a perfume that a woman that he was in love with in high school wore. He gave it to her as a gift, their first year dating, but he can't remember the name of it anymore. And he walks past this woman who is reading a wine label, and he sees a birthmark on the back of her neck, this area that black women call their kitchen. And she has a birthmark in her kitchen. Well, that, along with the perfume, seals the deal. He knows who this woman is. And he's happy that his sister Olga can't really see her because she's going to start talking about it. So they leave the grocery store, and in the car, Olga says, "Well, that doesn't happen every day." He says, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Estee Lauder, Youth Do. I smelled it in the store on somebody. That's an old-timey perfume." So they go into this whole thing. But Fletcher doesn't say anything. He doesn't mention to Olga that he has just seen Altavis Benson, the love of his life, who migrated north when they were teenagers. They worked in the movement together, and they were supposed to be the most likely to marry, but they didn't. And here she is, back from the past, walking around his Piggly Wiggly after 52 years.
And he's in his early 70s, and she's about the same age.
Yeah, they're almost 70, both of them.
Yeah, and they haven't seen each other in 50 years.
Yeah.
Something like that. So it's a classic narrative structure of a stranger comes back into town, in this case, and changes everything, upsets the apple cart.
And why is she back?
And why is she back? And there's
He
a
thinks-
mystery.
Yeah.
But you do something even, you tell the story of Fletcher and his sister Olga and the extended family. But you go much further back as well. You take us to the origin story of when the ancestor Malik was abducted and brought to America as a slave. And it's such a moving story, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you decided to include his story roughly a contemporary family story.
Right. I saw an arc between Bodie, who is Fletcher's grandson. He's 23 and having some addiction problems. I saw an arc between Bodie in the current day, 2012, and Malik, the ancestor in northern Africa, Senegal. I saw an arc between those two young men who are connected but have no idea. And as I wrote the ancestral story, I always knew there would be that ancestral story in there because I don't know my origins, and I thought it would be wonderful to invent an origin for these folks, but they don't get to know it either because of the wall of history. So as I wrote it, I wished I could tell the current day folks, I know all your stuff. I wrote it, of course, I know it, but I know all your stuff, and I wish I could tell you. I know where this tradition of carving the peach seed monkey comes from, and I know why you like to carve. It's all right there. And so that was interesting to me, and I also wanted to bring in the tenderness and the love for the ancestral story, because we get so relegated to one story. The African Americans and people of color, we have one story, and that's, of course, we know that's not true. So I wanted to not play down the brutality, obviously, but we know all of that stuff. I mean, so many enslavement stories just beat you over the head with the horror. And I wanted to bring in the happiness, the tender moments that had to exist in order for me to be here. So that was part of the whole thing with Malik, and it was quite interesting, very, very difficult, the research into enslavement period, but also finding the ways to bring in the joy was a joy to do that, and to see how all of that happened in the past still affects the present day family.
Well, and specifically, you use this talisman, essentially,
Yes.
of the peach seed monkey.
Peach seed monkey, yes.
And that's the title of your book. Tell us about the peach seed monkey, and maybe show us the peach seed monkey.
Yeah, I'll just put it up here if I do this correctly. Is it coming up there? Is that it? Yes, that's... So my cousin, one of my cousins in Ohio, when I was young, and my late sister Betty, we were young in Georgia. You know, when your northern cousins come to visit you in the Deep South, it's a big old thing. Because here they come with all their northernness. And when they leave, you sound a little bit like them because that's just what happens. But my cousin Paul Hearns carved this little monkey and gave it to my sister. He carved one for me too. But hers, as you can see, has little rhinestones for eyes. Well, mine didn't have that. And I'd like to know why, cousin, why he gave hers. But anyway, for years, never saw my sister Betty's little monkey. We never talked about it. We never asked Paul why he carved them. They just sat in a box for all those decades. And in '97, we tragically lost my sister Betty in a plane crash. And when we went to her apartment in Ann Arbor, Michigan, her jewelry box had this little monkey in it. Mm-hmm. And there it was. It took on great significance, as an object can do. And I realized that here it was, still intact, even though she was gone. And in that moment, it just took on a huge meaning. Fast forward 10 years to '07, when I began the story, the little monkey just jumped in the mix. He wanted to be a part of the story. And of course, he's looking at me to figure out how to make him fit. So I created I invented the rite of passage, and the men in the family carve these monkeys and hand them down to the young men. But it's only for the men, so there's a little bit of tension, because you're always looking for ways to bring in trouble in your story. Mm-hmm. So there's a good way to bring trouble. Leave the women out. You're going to have some trouble.
And it starts with Malik, too.
Yes,
so Malik discovers the peach seed.
Malik discovers it as he steps on it on the beach. So it was there was a lot of meaning it had. And then when the idea to make it a talisman came into the story, it enriched it. I wrote this I'm not a poet really, I wrote this long narrative poem in the monkey's voice. and I had it just kind of dispersed through the manuscript to a person, everyone, including my husband, Rob, who's sitting right there. He was my first reader. Everybody just ignored it. They wouldn't touch the monkey poem. They would just, talk about everything else. And I'm saying, well, what about that poem? Nobody had anything to say about it. So I ended up making it a lot shorter and putting it at I think it was at the chapter, the part. Each part got a little piece of the poem, but I thought it was very funny that people didn't know when you don't know what to do, you just don't do anything. Just don't say anything about the poem. But the working title for the book was Peach Seed Monkey for many years. And it served the project well. It was very mysterious. What is that? Even though it's literally what it says. And people had never heard of it. They'd never heard of the tradition. And when I Googled it, 1,000 hits, then 1,000,000 squillion hits didn't come up. So that was encouraging to me. However, I knew that I could never actually publish a book about Black people with monkey in the title because of the sad, sick connotations that has. And that to me is very sad because they're beautiful animals. These monkeys are just, and there's so many different types. So this story takes place in Padour, northern Senegal. So I went looking for what would be the monkey in that area that Malik would have heard when he was waiting on the beach to be taken out to the ship, and steps on that seed, and the seed and hearing the monkey, as you will see, I'm not going to give too much away, but you'll find out when you read the book. The green monkey is the monkey for that area, is one of the monkeys. So beautiful, has an sort of olive green, sage green fur, and just a beautiful animal. So,
So you went to Albany, back your hometown, to do research, and you discovered more about the civil rights movement in the 60s in Albany. Did you go to Senegal as well?
only in my mind.
Okay.
And on Google Maps.
Maybe next time.
Certainly, I have not set foot on the continent of Africa yet.
Yeah.
But I look forward to the day.
Yeah.
I do.
So you reconstructed a lot of that by reading history, the African part, by reading histories and using your imagination.
Right.
But with the Albany part, you researched the civil rights movement, and you were very lucky or fortunate because there had been was it an oral history project, or was it a reunion of some of the civil rights workers?
Right, 2011, the 50th anniversary of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC movement, the Albany movement, which took place in 1961 to 62. They had the 50th anniversary, and I had already planned a trip back to do research. And I was just lucky enough to find out about them doing that. And I went back. I went in March, and I had to go back in June, because while I was there in March, I learned about the June reunion. And it was amazing. I got to meet a lot of foot soldiers that had lived the lives of Fletcher and Altavis. And I just got their stories. I got to meet Charles Sherrod. And
who is Charles Sherrod?
Charles Sherrod was a field director in the Albany movement, and he ended up staying in Southwest Georgia and was very instrumental in changing a lot of things in town. But he was one of the people that was going around. He was a young man at the time, in his 20s, going around with voter registration and setting the groundwork for the movement. And he just passed away about 2 years ago, I think. But what he said, I'll never forget what he said at the reunion. He said one of the biggest lies the country, U.S., ever told was when they told poor whites that they were better than blacks. And I thought about that for a long time, and it's very true. And what King was starting to do was trying to combine the two, the poor people's movement, not just black people, but also poor people, because you're in the same boat, you just don't realize it. So that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And meeting a lot of the folks. It was a huge gift to the project.
Yeah. So you set off with a driving question, and the question was, how did black men facing systemic racism, facing the indignities of living in the world in the mid-20th century and onward. How did they remain leaders in their communities? And you had your dad as a model, and you had other men that you met in the course of your family life, but also in the course of your research. And in this book, you really cover four generations of men. And there are many variations of how these men survive the world in which they inhabit and they're forced to inhabit. And we've talked a little bit about Fletcher, who's such a wonderful, unforgettable character. And you mentioned Bo D, his grandson, who, in my mind, is just as vibrant a character. He's in his early 20s. As you mentioned, he's struggling with addiction problems, but more importantly, he's struggling with this issue of what does he do with his life? Who is he? How does he rise up to what his family expects him to become? How did you find his character and find his path for him? I mean, your characters, as you say, kind of lived in your own mind, but could you talk to us a little bit about Bo D?
His real name is Terrence. His mother does not like his nickname. And Bo D for me was such a necessary character because by the time that I realized I had too many points of view and I took away the points of view of Olga and Altavis and realized that this was a story about four men in one family. And that just clarified so many things because you have so many decisions to make. When a decision is made for you when you're writing, you're just so grateful. Thank you. I know that they were born in this year because I want them to be this age at that time, so thank you. But for Bo D, when I was doing some research back in 2011, I was on campus of Albany State University, which was Albany State College when I was growing up, HBCU in Albany, Georgia. And I was lucky enough to be on campus at the time that the kids were out, and I struck up a conversation with this little knot of young men. And I went and bought a pizza, and we were just kind of kicking it. Turns out if you bring pizza, people will talk to you. So they energized me around putting a young man in the story that can reflect what it's like to be young at that time in a town where there's nothing to do. You got to go to Atlanta for, the whole story about young people that they have in their hometowns. And then I realized there was an opportunity with Bo D's character to bring all of that in, plus the addiction part, because there's so much addiction in the country, and it's just not talked about in families, or it's just not dealt with in a positive way. And so I thought, yeah, let me do that, because it's a wonderful opportunity, and it's so rich. Let me do that. So
you did it so beautifully, and one of the things that I was so struck with was the way that no one in his family gave up on him.
Right.
And his great aunt, Olga, wouldn't give up on him. Fletcher was kind of tough with him, but wouldn't give up on him.
Yeah.
And, it was really, your book is a beautiful testament to the strength of extended families, I think.
Thank you. That was one of the most touching book events. It was at a high school near me where I volunteer in Novato. And these are students that don't necessarily love reading, but they read the book. And one of the young men he wanted to talk about it. He had some questions. And he told me that he really liked Bo D. And for that reason, he said his family never gave up on him.
Yeah.
And I was almost brought to tears in that moment, because I could tell that this young man wanted the same for himself. And we had a nice conversation. So I think he's resonating with people, Bo D is. And people think that maybe I had addiction problems because I guess I wrote the addiction stuff a little bit too well.
You did write it very vividly.
You know all that stuff.
Yeah.
Imagination's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
But a lot of research, but also I have 3 very dear friends who are addicts, and they were recovering addicts. And they were willing to give me so many details. I could text them or call them, and they would just be forthcoming with details. And I really appreciated that. And then YouTube, there's so many, you can just fall down that hole and never be seen again doing research on YouTube.
Yeah.
But that's how I did it, and then just imagining.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful family book, and I know the answer, but I want everybody else to know. The next book is going to feature some of those women. This Peach Seed features the men, and now we get to the women.
Right.
Yeah.
The next book, it was a 2-book deal with Henry Holt, and the next book is actually my first book that I started a long time ago. It's so old, it's on floppy disks. And my husband Rob had to go on eBay and find a external hard drive, and we digitally chiseled it off. And I hadn't seen those pages in years. But I started a book in 1988 when I was living in New York, working as a model, frustrated with that industry for a lot of the same reasons you can be frustrated with the publishing industry. And I just wrote those pages, and then I put them aside and started the Peach Seed. But the name of that book is Head Rag, and it follows a young woman. It's autobiographical in a way. It follows a young woman from South Georgia to her move to New York City to become a model. The night before she leaves, the family gathers and gives her gifts. Her grandmother gives her an old scarf, a head rag, that the grandmother's mother wore as a sharecropper, and the grandmother herself wore as a domestic worker. And now she's giving it to her granddaughter, who's taking it off to New York to wear, to keep the makeup off the clothes and keep her hair just right for the runway. But in time, this young woman sees this as an heirloom, a connection to the women in her past, from cotton fields to day work to fashion shows. So that was the pitch that I gave over the phone.
Excellent.
And my soon-to-be editor said, "That's amazing."
Yeah.
And then she put it in the deal the next day.
It is amazing.
That's how I
It
got
really
it.
resonates. It's a great, great book. There's a nonfiction book called All She Carries.
Yes, she
by
mentioned
Kaya.
that.
Yeah.
About Ashley's.
Yeah, sack.
Ashley
so a
sack.
sack through the generations that's used in different ways, and but that's a nonfiction book, and it's going
Yeah.
to be amazing to do it in a fictional.
So I guess that's why it sat on the floppy disk all this time. It was waiting for the right time. I don't know, just got amazingly lucky. I've started the work on it, and
Well, I
I'm
can't
very
wait.
excited to give those there are 2 women from the Peach Seed that will be in Head Rag, and they will have voices, finally.
Well, I want to thank you so much, and I think we should turn it to questions.
Thank you so much. We're now going to open it up to questions. So please raise your hand and I'll come over with the microphone.
Thank you. That was great.
What's that?
That was great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm enjoying the book. I haven't finished it yet, but it's
Oh,
very nice.
thank you.
My question, given that it took you so long to write this book, where did you veer off in other directions in terms of writing, and what did you do? What other writing did you do in the interim? And I guess, why did you put it down? Why did you pick it up, or was it just a constant process?
The second, life was happening, for one thing. Raising a daughter, we raised our daughter, and I was the main teacher for homeschooling for many years. But I always was writing it. It never had long periods where I just wasn't close to it, and I think that was part of why I could stay with it, too. And I was doing some residencies to work on it, one at Hedgebrook, which is off the coast of Seattle. I did some time at Headlands. So it was always in the mix, not ever getting too cold and away from the story. It's not the case with Head Rag. It sat on the floppy disks for all those years. But so that was how it was happening. So I always encourage people to not give up on their characters if it's fiction, or their ideas if it's nonfiction, because you are all they have. And if you give up on them, they're going to be pissed, first of all, and you're going to have to live with that. But yeah, staying behind it. The moment that I made a decision to go in 2011 to actually purchase a ticket to go home for research, that was a pivotal moment in the process, because now I was throwing money at the project. And now you got to really you got to own it. You got to say, yes, I'm a writer, and yes, I'm working on a novel, which surprisingly is not easy to say for some people. It's not easy to own. So I did it in 2011 when I decided to go back, and that gave me permission also to push. But what really sealed the deal was I told myself, if I don't get an agent and an editor by a certain date, I will self-publish. One way or another, I'm going to have my book. And I'm going to take it through the right process, and editing and all that. But that gave me real permission to push. And the baby was born.
And we're happy about it. We're glad that baby was born.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Congratulations on your huge success.
Thank you.
And very exciting. I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
I also think that connecting with your family and going back and having that relationship with your father and through your book and all that must be very special. And you have so many relatives to draw on. You might have many books to come. But I love the fact of you having the chance to work over and really look at honor his legacy and who he was and all that. I think it's really dynamic. And thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That was totally inspirational.
Oh, thanks.
And my question is, who is it in your life who gave you the inspiration to believe so much in yourself?
Irene Jones, my mother, who was in awe of artists. She didn't consider herself an artist. She was a sixth grade teacher and a school librarian for 39 years in South Georgia, and lived her whole life pretty much in that area too. But there was never a question about your ability and your potential, and that reading is important. All of those things were just naturally in our house, and so she would just guide us and make us believe that we could, and also by her example. She went to work every day, and she just handled life, and you watched her do it, and so you knew how to do it. So we lost her at the age of 66 in 92, much too soon, but she lives on. So I had her and then my sister Betty, who she was only 4.5 years older than I am, but she was always old for her age, and she helped to raise me in that way. So she had a PhD in American theater and was at the top of her game when she died in a plane crash. But playwright, director, amazing, phenomenal woman. So I had those two people that really sealed it for me. And I'm glad it comes through.
I love that question. It's a great question.
Never been asked that.
I want to thank you on behalf of writers like Ishmael Reed, with whom we had so many conversations about how black males were put down by writers in the late 80s and the early 90s, and we weren't seeing ourselves as we thought we really were. Mm-hmm. And I think he'd really appreciate the fact that you've elevated us and brought us up. I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Noah. That means a lot coming from you, Noah. Thank you.
You mentioned that somebody helped you choose 4 characters or to shrink the point of view. I assume that was an editor or your agent, I'm not sure. And then can you talk a little bit more about what it's like being in the book publishing business, just in general, and then also as a woman of color and just where it's going? I don't know. What's your opinion? Just curious.
Yes, thank you. It's quite a journey. I think that I have a group of friends, writing friends. We call the group First Book, and we were all working on our first books, and I happened to be the one that got the first book first. And it's really hard to now look at my friends still struggling, because there's some amazing writers, incredible manuscripts that will never see the light of day, maybe because of whatever. So I feel very grateful and lucky to be in the process, but I also realize that I worked hard at it, at getting there and not giving up, and taking and leveraging each little step and entering contests and hoping for that. And so it's really about sticking with it and trusting that if this door doesn't open, then another one will. And I don't talk about writer's block. I don't really believe in blocking, because I don't think that's the way creativity works. I look at it as a detour. You've got to find another way around. And that's the same thing with promoting a book, because that's the other part of this process. It's not enough that you've written it. You've got to now promote it. And that's part of the hardest thing for me, is the balance between the writing life and the public-facing life. And because of my experience with storytelling many years, I don't have trouble with this part of it, but it does take you away from the writing part of it. So you've got to find that balance. Got to get back to the second book. So those kinds of challenges are real, and everybody deals with them the best way they can. And it's I hear all kinds of writers talking about that being a problem. A nice problem to have, yes, but it still is something you have to deal with. So the industry itself has a lot of parts of it that I don't get, I don't understand. But my husband saw in, it was AARP magazine, I think, that had some numbers about 1,000 to 1 chance of being published by one of the big five. And I said, oh yeah, AARP, that statistic is based on guess who? White men. So what do you think it is for a black woman? Triple, quadruple, who knows? They didn't do the statistics on that. But it is, I said all that to say it's not wasted on me the fact that I got an agent and he found a publisher, and my call that I sent out to the universe for a black female editor, I had the audacity to hope for that, and I got it, and Retha Powers. So I just think there were a lot of things that lined up, and a lot of luck and a lot of hard work that landed me here, and I'm grateful. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, and I believe we are at time.
Thank you so much for coming. Say one more thing. I have to say this. This is really funny. When I started the project, I was of a certain age, and I asked a friend of mine who was 70, because I was going to write the scene for Altavis and Fletcher, sex scene. I said, so what's that 70-year-old sex like, you know? And she said, well, you're getting closer and closer yourself. You'll know pretty soon, but it's pretty much a DIY situation.
That's funny. That's funny.
Thank you so much. I was hoping we'd have at least 10 people, and look, we have more.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, that was great. On that great note, a DIY situation.
I thought that was hilarious.